Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. On this episode of the Global Recovery Monitor podcast series, Craig Jeffery and Alexa Cook of Strategic Treasure revealed Period 14's results from the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. This new release shines a positive light on economic and health viewpoints. Top headlines include end-of-year job situations by industry, AR changes, outlook on liquidity positions, economic recovery time estimates, and more. Listen in to find out how finance and treasury organizations are weighing in on the global state of recovery. Welcome back to the show, Craig and Alexa.
Thanks for having us, Meredith.
Yeah, it's good to talk about this topic again.
Excellent. So we are now 14 survey periods into the Global Recovery Monitor. Let's start off with the top headlines.
Yeah, now that we're just about half a year into the Global Monitor, that's just startling to recognize that we've been doing this for just under 6 months. The top headlines include the end of the year job situation by industry, and that's pretty bleak. 48% expect things to be stable, 9% expect things to expand, and then 43% expect some contraction in jobs by their industry. So about 1/3 of organizations expect their industry to do a little bit of contraction. Second, there is a change in AR that will surprise you happily. That's a very good positive tailwind. And then some of the financial negative and positive highlights just really focus on organizational liquidity. That improved again over the prior period. 34% viewed this more positively, and 13% viewed their situation as moving in a negative position. So a little over 20% were positive there. Alexa?
Yeah, so I'll touch on some of those economic highlights now. So both the 3-month and the 12-month outlook have improved, and they're both headed towards equilibrium. And from this measure, a full economic recovery has really shifted from that 7.5 months that it was at prior period down to about 6 months, which is making that total recovery estimate still in the first quarter of 2021.
This past survey period, we cycled back a few survey questions on projects. Craig, tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so early on in the monitor, we asked questions about what's going on with projects. Are they starting, pausing, canceling, being altered? And it wasn't bleak. It was there was pullback, there was a lot of altering. But what we found out at this point was that fully a quarter of the firms had started a project during the, I'll call it the work from home COVID environment. 5%, only 5% had canceled projects. Another 16%, about a sixth there, paused a project, not stopped it entirely, but paused it. And then a little over a third or 35% altered a project. And it was pretty well split. About 10, 11% of those increased project scope or decreased project scope. So it was very balanced. And then the remainder, which was about 80%, reprioritized what was going on.
What about operational and financial risk? Can you walk us through some of this period's findings?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief on that. So we asked, I think it was about 8 questions. What are your top operational and financial risk? What's leading the concern? And I would encourage everybody to look and download the report. But I thought it was pretty interesting that, interest rate, FX, those were not in the top 4, but the top 1 and 4 were counterparty risk. 1 was related to customers, 4 was related to suppliers. Number 2 and 3 were both related to cyber fraud. Cyber fraud with regards to data theft and cyber fraud with relationship to payment. So cyber fraud is right up there near the top with the concerns about, AR, of course, counterparty concerns about the customer side.
Interesting. Were there any changes to the top concerns from the prior period?
Yeah, this is the second forced ranking question that we have. And we haven't run this the entire survey, but for those that remember, we talk about the COVID health situation, COVID response, election, civil unrest. This changed dramatically. I think it's the fourth period we've run it. COVID health concern, which was number one, was number one, is now number 4. The COVID response and impact, what was the response to the COVID situation? That was number 2, and that's moved up to the number 1 position. So how we're responding is a big concern. So it's very interesting that the actual health issue dropped so much. Elections, which was number 3, moved to 2, and civil unrest, which was number 4 last period, moved to 3. So quite a bit of reordering there. Nothing was in the same position as before.
And I'll add to that too, Craig. So for the weekly top concerns, which was also a forced ranking response, there wasn't as much of a shuffling here. Direct financial impact has stayed at number 1. Staff safety protocols, which has been tied for number 1, is now dropped down to number 2. However, on average, throughout the periods of the survey, it's been number 5 out of the 7 of the forced ranking responses. And then access to adequate liquidity has stayed the same in spot number 3.
How are the time estimates for health and financial normalcy looking?
Yeah, so for the health outlook, the extension of time until COVID-19 becomes a minor health issue has really stayed consistent at the 11-month range. And I believe in the last period, this was really a big spike up. So that's just stayed consistent this time. And then for the inflection point, this has moved from 5 months down to about 4 months. So not a huge change there either. And then for financial normalcy, in individual businesses, this also came in at 11 months, which has been consistent to the prior period again. And then this period, we've also asked a new question, which is what or when respondents think that the death toll from COVID-19 will peak. And respondents are saying that this will be in 2 months from now. So that's probably why a lot of these other time frames or ranges are 11 months out.
Each period I typically ask you about AR and fiscal policy. Any changes on the negative outlook here?
Yeah, so as Craig alluded in the headlines at the beginning, the period over period for AR is basically neutral, which is the first time ever that we are not significantly negative. So that's a good positive change for the AR outlook. And
we like good news.
Yes, that's great news. And then for the fiscal policy, this is also a slightly better news. It was negative 3.5 times, but now it's only negative 2 times. So it's a somewhat of a shift in a positive direction, but not as drastic as the AR shift.
Before we wrap up the episode, what do we need to be thinking about for the weeks ahead?
Well, I think continuing to monitor what's going on and what are the attitudes, that's important. I think everyone's seen the equity markets doing really well, which is a future expectation. And that's impacted in terms of what the Fed's doing. So some of the questions we're asking have to do with central bank policy and how that's impacting what they're doing, because we think that should be really interesting to see how that's changing behaviors and attitudes. We look at economic views out over some longer time domains to gauge what people are thinking into 2021 through that period of time. And then we're also exploring in a different way the work from home, work from the office mix, both the historical, like have you returned to the office more, and then what are the expectations over a couple other domains, like where will you be at the beginning of the year and at June 30th in 2021, just to see what the thinking is for moving back or staying home.
Well, thanks, Craig and Alexa. I'm looking forward to catching up with you both next month as we move forward with the Global Recovery Series.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Meredith.
Thanks, Meredith.
We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor Survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.